In the third year of their marriage, Gilbert and her accidentally soaked their marriage certificate in coffee, ruining it. Cynthia took the damaged document to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get a replacement. The staff member tapped a few keys on the computer, then suddenly looked up at her. "Ma'am, our system shows your marital status is single." She froze for a moment, thinking she must have misheard. "That's impossible. My husband and I got our marriage license here 3 years ago." The staff checked again, their expression turning somewhat odd. "The system does show you as single, but Gilbert is listed as married." She paused. "His spouse registration lists another woman, named Blanche. Do you know her?" Cynthia's mind exploded with a buzz, leaving only a sharp ringing in her ears. Everyone knew that Cynthia and Gilbert were childhood sweethearts. She was the white moonlight in his heart, the person he carefully protected in his youth. And Blanche was the replacement Gilbert found because he missed her too much during those 2 years she was abroad. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful novels every day. Now the story begins. Cynthia clutched the fake marriage certificate soaked in coffee and stumbled into the car in a daze. Her phone suddenly vibrated twice. Gilbert's message popped up. "Baby, I canceled a $1 billion deal to buy your favorite roses and strawberry cake, just to come home early and be with you. I miss you so much. Do you miss me too?" She stared at the message and suddenly burst into laughter. As she laughed, tears streamed down her cheeks. For 3 years, he had asked her this same question every day, expressing his love for her. But it turned out, he had already secretly become legally married to someone else. She remembered when she was little, Gilbert fell from a 3-meter-high tree while trying to retrieve her kite, fracturing his right arm, yet still smiling as he handed her the kite, saying, "Cynthia, don't cry. It doesn't hurt." She remembered on her 15th birthday, he stood in the rain all night beneath her window, just to be the first to wish her happy birthday. When she woke up, she remembered at her 18th birthday celebration, he rented out the entire amusement park, knelt on one knee amidst a sky full of fireworks, and said, "Cynthia, when I turn 22, let's get married, okay?" She remembered studying abroad, when he pressed her against the airport wall with reddened eyes, his voice trembling. "2 years. I'll only give you 2 years. When the time's up, I'll come and drag you back." During those 2 years abroad, he video called her almost every day. Once, she was too busy finishing her thesis and didn't answer his calls for 3 days. When they finally reconnected, she learned he'd been hospitalized for alcohol abuse. On the video call, his eyes were bloodshot. "Baby, I can't live without you." She always coaxed him. "He'll be back soon. Just wait a little longer." On the day she returned to the country, she didn't tell Gilbert, wanting to surprise him. But when she pushed open the door of the private room, she saw him passionately kissing a girl. The girl's profile bore a striking resemblance to hers. Her bag fell to the ground with a thud, and she turned to leave. Gilbert chased after her like a madman. When she didn't answer his calls, he kept sending messages. When she refused to see him, he stood in the rain outside her building, explaining over and over again, "It's not what you think. All these years you wouldn't let me visit you. I missed you so much. That's why I found a substitute. I swear, we just hugged and kissed. Nothing else happened. Cynthia, I was wrong, but I'm truly madly in love with you." In the end, he stood in the rain for 3 days and nights until he collapsed from high fever-induced pneumonia. Even after being hospitalized, he refused to leave until she finally softened and forgave him. Afterwards, he treated her just as well as before. It wasn't until after marriage that she noticed his assistant had been replaced by Blanche. That stand-in, he claimed, had already been sent away. He explained again, "Her parents are in poor health, and she couldn't adjust to life abroad. She begged me in tears to return to City A. She applied for my assistant position without my knowledge. She has good work abilities and was selected through multiple rounds of screening. I can't just fire her casually." So she tolerated it once again. Little did she know that by enduring it, she ended up making a complete fool of herself. As the car entered the villa area, Cynthia's tears had already dried. She took a deep breath and was about to push the door open when she heard Gilbert and his brother talking in the living room. "I just came back from the hospital. Blanche is fine. Just some minor scratches. You can stay home with Cynthia without worry." Gilbert leaned back on the sofa, his black shirt unbuttoned at the collar, long legs crossed. Frowning, he stubbed out the cigarette in his brother's hand, his voice low and cold. How many times have I told you? No smoking in my house. Cynthia hates the smell of smoke. All right. You wife-spoiling maniac. The brother teased with a laugh, but I really don't get it. You clearly love Cynthia so much. So why did you insist on getting married to Blanche back then? Honestly, did you not just see her as a substitute? The air fell silent for a few seconds. Then, Gilbert's deep voice came through. So what if I did? I used to think she was just a substitute too. Cynthia wouldn't be needed once she returned. But after she was sent away, I dreamed of her almost every night. Eventually I couldn't bear her absence anymore. So I brought her back and kept her by my side as an assistant. I can't live without Cynthia. But Blanche, I can't let go of her either. Cynthia can openly enjoy my affection, while Blanche can only lurk in the shadows, given a title as compensation. So what? The brother sighed. Aren't you afraid Cynthia will find out? With her temperament, if she knew, even if you died in front of her, she wouldn't look back. Gilbert remained silent for a moment, his Adam's apple bobbing. Then she must never know. Cynthia stood outside the door, feeling as if all the blood in her body had frozen. She thought she would break down in tears, but found she couldn't even shed a drop. So this is what the ultimate pain feels like. It's as if a piece of her heart had been carved out while alive. Yet it must keep beating. She remembered Gilbert gently kissing her forehead before leaving this morning. Remembered how he'd hold her drunk after every business dinner, murmuring, "Darling, I can't live without you." Remembered him pressing her cold hands against his chest, saying this heart beats only for you. It was all a lie. On her way back, she had still been wondering if he had some hidden difficulties. Only now did she realize that he had simply fallen in love with two people at the same time. What he wanted was never to choose between them, but to keep one as his white moonlight and the other as his cinnabar mole. Great. Gilbert, wasn't he afraid she'd find out? Well then, she'd show him what it truly means to never look back. She turned and left, immediately doing two things. First, she went to cancel all her domestic identity records. Second, she changed her name. The staff informed her that all the procedures would be completed within 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, Gilbert could search high and low, but he would never find her again. Cynthia turned and walked away, her phone vibrating incessantly in her bag, filled with Gilbert's missed calls and messages. She didn't look at them, nor did she reply. By the time I got home, it was already dark. Gilbert was standing in the living room. The moment he saw her, he strode over, his anxiety clearly visible in his eyes. "Baby, where have you been? I came home to find you gone and waited for hours. I almost turned the whole city upside down looking for you." His concern didn't seem fake. Cynthia stared at him blankly, her heart feeling as if it were being tightly squeezed by an invisible hand. She suddenly remembered back in high school when he went to participate in a math competition. She was just an hour late replying to his message, and he immediately abandoned the competition to rush back to find her, fearing something had happened to her. Someone who clearly loved her so much. Yet the love he gave wasn't unique after all. Her throat felt as if something was stuck in it. Even breathing brought a fine, sharp pain. But in the end, she just spoke calmly. "I went shopping and forgot to tell you." "Sorry." Gilbert finally relaxed and pulled her into his arms. "Why are you apologizing to me? I'm not blaming you. I'm just worried." He lowered his head to kiss the top of her hair, his voice gentle. "All right, baby. You mentioned the day before yesterday that you wanted to eat sweet and sour pork ribs and steamed sea bass. I'll make them for you." "Okay." With that, he released her and turned to enter the kitchen. Cynthia stood at the doorway, quietly watching Gilbert. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his slender fingers deftly chopping vegetables, his profile appearing exceptionally gentle under the warm yellow light. She suddenly remembered that 3 years ago, when she had just returned to China, her irregular eating habits had led to severe stomach problems, landing her in the hospital. At that time, Gilbert, a billionaire CEO who had never cooked before, spent an entire month learning culinary skills from a top chef. Once, when an international video conference clashed with the time he was supposed to cook for her, he simply propped up a tablet in the kitchen, stir-frying while listening to reports, leaving the executives utterly stunned. He once loved her so deeply, but at this moment, his phone rang. Cynthia saw him glance at the screen, his expression shifting slightly. Then he put down the knife and quickly wiped his hands. "Sweetheart, there's an urgent matter at the company. I have to go," he said as he untied his apron, his tone as calm as ever. even remembering to lean down and kiss her forehead. 3 dishes are already done. You can start eating. No need to wait for me. Cynthia didn't speak, just nodded slightly. After he left, she walked to the dining table and looked at the still steaming dishes. Suddenly, her heart ached so much she could barely breathe. She had clearly seen it, that phone call was from Blanche. Instead of sitting down to eat as he wished, she went out, hailed a taxi, and followed him. Sure enough, Gilbert didn't go to the company, but to the hospital. In the corridor of the hospital's VIP ward, the entire floor had been cleared, with only a few doctors and nurses in white coats standing nervously at the ward door. The hospital director was bowing, humbly apologizing to Gilbert. Mr. Gilbert, we sincerely apologize for our inadequate care, which led to Ms. Blanche falling in the bathroom. We will definitely assign more caregivers to ensure such a mistake never happens again. Gilbert had a dark expression, his voice as cold as ice. If this happens again, this hospital won't need to stay open. The hospital director nodded repeatedly. Yes, we'll be more careful. Cynthia stood at the corner, her fingertips digging into her palms. His brother had clearly said that Blanche only had minor scrapes. But now, it seems that for just a minor scrape, he had the entire building evacuated. And now that something has happened, he's so nervous he'd practically tear the whole hospital apart. The ward door was pushed open. Blanche leaned weakly against the headboard, her face pale and her eyes red. Gilbert hurried over and grasped her hand. How are you? Does it still hurt anywhere? Blanche had reddened eyes and a choked voice. It's all my fault. Getting hit by a car was bad enough, but then I had to slip and fall while taking a shower, leaving you no time to accompany Ms. Cynthia. What if she misunderstands? I'm such a jinx. What nonsense are you talking about? He scolded in a low voice, yet his tone was gentle. Focus on recovering. I'll be here with you these days. Blanche lifted her teary eyes. What about Ms. Cynthia? Gilbert replied calmly. I'll handle it. Don't worry about it. After a pause, he added, we're husband and wife. Isn't it only natural for me to be with you? Cynthia felt her blood freeze in an instant. Husband and wife. What a perfect pair. Before she could even process it, the next moment, she saw Gilbert remove the prayer beads from his wrist and gently place them on Blanche's hand. And one more thing. Never call yourself a jinx again. This string of prayer beads has been blessed. I've worn it for 7 years, and now I pass it to you. May it bring you peace and prosperity. Blanche was moved to tears and reached out to embrace him. Cynthia stood outside the door, her vision blurred as if she were drowning in the depths of the sea. That string of prayer beads. It was the year she turned 18. Kneeling every 3 steps and bowing every 9, making her way from the foot of the mountain all the way to the temple at the summit to pray for it. That day, it rained heavily. She knelt until her knees bled and her palms were worn raw before the abbot finally blessed it for her. After returning, Gilbert saw her covered in disarray, and his eyes instantly reddened. He pulled her into a tight embrace, his voice trembling. Cynthia, are you crazy? Who told you to suffer like this? Smiling, she placed the prayer beads around his wrist. The abbot said these beads will protect you, bring you peace and prosperity, and grant you a long life. He lowered his head to kiss her and said, I'll wear it for a lifetime. For the next 7 years, he truly never took it off, even in the most formal business settings, even in the most intimate moments. This string of prayer beads remained on his wrist, but now, he personally placed it on another woman's hand. The heart felt as if it were being slowly sliced open by a blunt knife, the pain so intense that even breathing became difficult. So, his entire lifetime had only been 7 years after all. She turned and walked away, her steps unsteady, as if treading on cotton. By the time she returned home, night had already fallen. She had just walked through the door when her phone vibrated. It was Gilbert's message. Baby, something urgent came up at work. I have to go on a business trip abroad for a few days. Don't be mad. I'll make it up to you when I get back. Cynthia stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, trembling slightly. She typed out a line. Is it really a business trip for a few days? Or are you going to spend them with your wife? But in the end, she deleted it word by word, tears falling on the screen, blurring her vision. After that, she spent the whole time packing her luggage, ID, passport, bank cards. Everything that could prove her identity was packed into the suitcase. 3 days later, Gilbert returned. He pushed open the door, holding a large bouquet of roses in one hand and a strawberry cake in the other. His smile gentle. Baby, I'm back. Cynthia stood in the center of the living room, quietly watching him. He walked over, placed the flowers and cake on the table, and reached out to hug her. Work at the company has been really busy these days. I had to go abroad. Otherwise, I wouldn't have left you for so long. Dawn. Be angry. Okay. She slightly turned away, avoiding his embrace, her tone calm. I am not angry. Go ahead and focus on your work. He paused for a moment, then smiled and said, no more work. Everything that needed to be done is finished. Now it's time to pamper you. He took her hand, his eyes filled with anticipation. I've prepared a surprise for you. Without waiting for her response, he pulled her into the car. Half an hour later, the car stopped in front of a concert hall. Cynthia walked in and found the entire hall had been reserved, with people seated all around. Upon their entry, the crowd began whispering among themselves. Mr. Gilbert has really gone all out, reserving the entire concert hall for Miss Cynthia. I heard he specially flew in her favorite orchestra from abroad, and they'll be performing exclusive pieces for her all day today. That orchestra's value has skyrocketed now. A conservative estimate puts this trip at over $1 billion. What's this about? Mr. Gilbert is famously known for spoiling his wife. Cynthia stood under the dazzling lights, surrounded by the envy of the crowd, facing Gilbert's gentle smile. Yet her heart felt as if soaked in ice water, aching with cold. He gave her grand romance, but bestowed marital status upon another. He let her live in the admiration of the crowd, yet allowed another woman to exist on his marriage certificate. Cynthia sat in the VIP seats of the concert hall, surrounded by melodious piano music, with Gilbert's gentle smile before her eyes. He leaned over to adjust her shawl and whispered, Are you cold? She shook her head but instinctively frowned as a sharp pain shot through her lower abdomen. Gilbert immediately sensed, Is it your period? She felt the warm flow beneath her and nodded, his warm palm pressed against her lower abdomen, gently massaging as he spoke apologetically. Is the pain bad? Should we go back? Cynthia shook her head. Gilbert couldn't persuade her otherwise, so he had no choice but to call his assistant to deliver sanitary products and heating pads. During this time, his attention was entirely focused on her, occasionally massaging her stomach, softly asking if she needed hot water or a blanket, treating her with such care as if she were still the treasure he held in his hands. Half an hour later, someone hurried over and called out softly, Mr. Gilbert. The items have been delivered. Cynthia and Gilbert turned their heads simultaneously. It's Blanche. She was holding a paper bag in her hand, her hair slightly damp, and her face still somewhat pale. Gilbert's expression changed instantly. You've just recovered from your injury. Who told you to come? Didn't I ask Lin Fan? Blanche bit her lip and said softly, Assistant Lin is currently negotiating a project. I was worried that Miss Cynthia was in too much pain, and I didn't want to keep you waiting. So I came on my own, she said, carefully handing over the paper bag, and added, It's pouring outside, and I forgot my umbrella. But don't worry, the heating pads and sanitary products are perfectly protected. Not a drop of rain touched them. Gilbert had a complex shift in expression before finally taking the bag first and handing it to Cynthia. Sweetheart, I'll go with you to change. Cynthia said nothing and took the items to the restroom. By the time she came out, Gilbert, who had said he would wait outside, was already gone. She was about to leave when she heard faint noises coming from the adjacent restroom. She walked over to take a look. Gilbert pinned Blanche against the sink, kissing her deeply. Blanche half-heartedly resisted. Don't. Ms. Cynthia is still waiting for you. Let's not worry about her for now. Gilbert's voice was low and hoarse. Running here in such heavy rain. Are you trying to break my heart? I was just afraid that if we waited too long, Ms. Cynthia would feel uncomfortable, and seeing her uncomfortable would make you uncomfortable too. Blanche's voice trembled with tears. I just want you to be happy. Gilbert seemed even more distressed, kissing her more deeply. Blanche couldn't help but let out a soft moan. He chuckled softly, his voice tender. Feeling something, Blanche blushed and pushed him away. Go keep Miss Cynthia company. I can handle this myself. How will you handle it? Gilbert teased with affectionate mockery. For things like this, a man's help makes it more enjoyable. His hand ventured downward. Then came the rustling of fabric, Blanche's suppressed gasps, and Gilbert's deep, Coaxing murmur. Be good. Relax. Cynthia stood outside the door, her heart aching with unbearable pain. She remembered their first kiss, at the age of 18, under a sky full of fireworks. He cupped her face and asked cautiously, Cynthia, may I kiss you? Blushing, she nodded, and he leaned down to kiss her, as gentle as if holding a fragile treasure. She remembered their first night together. He was restrained and patient, asking her repeatedly if it hurt, and only when she shook her head did he dare to fully possess her. Afterward, he held her for a long time, soothing her and promising to treat her well for the rest of his life. But now, he was in the bathroom, using his fingers to pleasure another woman. Gilbert, ah Gilbert, you have betrayed me utterly. Her heart felt as if it had been torn in two, the pain so intense she could barely stand. She staggered backward, accidentally bumping into a decorative vase by the wall. Who's there? Gilbert's cold, sharp voice rang out. Gilbert chased outside, only to find the corridor empty except for an orange cat crouched in the corner, watching him warily. Looks like a cat. Blanche followed and said softly, you should go accompany Ms. Cynthia. I'll just take a taxi back later. Gilbert frowned. In such heavy rain. What taxi are you talking about? Stay by my side. Blanche bit her lip and whispered, but Ms. Cynthia, who is your man? Gilbert suddenly grasped her chin, his voice deep. Blanche blushed instantly and whispered, you. Then listen to me. He took her hand and directly led her back to the concert hall. When they pushed the door open, Cynthia was still sitting in her original seat, quietly listening to the performance. Gilbert let out a sigh of relief, pulling Blanche to sit beside her as she casually explained, sweetheart, the rain outside is too heavy, and she happens to enjoy the performance too, so I let her stay. Cynthia responded with a soft, choosing not to expose him. Throughout the entire concert, Gilbert remained Cynthia's attentive caretaker. He asked if she was cold, massaged her stomach, and even whispered to ask if she wanted to leave early to rest. But Cynthia knew that his left hand remained tightly intertwined with Blanche's, fingers laced together. Suddenly, she remembered the first time they held hands. That year she was 16, on a snowy winter night. He secretly climbed over the wall to her house, stretched out his frost-reddened hand to her, and said with a smile, Cynthia, my hands are so cold. Will you warm them for me? Blushing, she took his hand, and he immediately tightened his grip, never letting go again. Back then, his eyes were only on her, but now, he holds her hand while holding someone else's. A tear slips uncontrollably down. Gilbert notices immediately, his thumb gently brushing her cheek. What's wrong? Cynthia smiled softly and whispered, the music is so moving. Gilbert chuckled low, his voice dripping with affection. Such a baby, so easily sentimental. She didn't speak, letting him wipe away her tears. After the concert ended, the crowd gradually dispersed. Gilbert didn't let Cynthia leave. He had someone push forward a pile of musical instruments, piano, cello, violin, each one worth a fortune. You once said these instruments were good, so I bought them all at high prices. He asked her with a smile. Do you like them? A staff member nearby immediately added, Ms. Cynthia, Mr. Gilbert went through a lot of trouble for these instruments. Some were acquired through high-priced auctions from private collectors, while others were borrowed from museums. Blanche stood to the side, a shadow flickering in her eyes. Cynthia twitched her lips and was about to speak. What's this? Blanche suddenly reached out and curiously tugged at a decorative rope nearby. Don't pull it. The staff member's face turned pale, but it was already too late. A mechanical rumbling sound came from above, and the next second, heavy lighting rigs and audio equipment came crashing down. In the blink of an eye, Gilbert grabbed Blanche and shielded her in his arms as they rolled aside. Meanwhile, Cynthia stood frozen, watching helplessly as the dark shadow came crashing down upon her. Bang! Agonizing pain surged through her as she collapsed into a pool of blood. Her final conscious thought was Gilbert's frantic cry, Cynthia! Yet she knew, the one he held in his arms was someone else. Cynthia had a very long dream. In the dream, the 14-year-old Gilbert was still wearing his school uniform, with a bruise at the corner of his mouth, yet grinning wildly and unrestrained. While applying medicine to his wounds, she scolded him with reddened eyes. Are you out of your mind? Taking on 30 guys alone? Even Ultraman wouldn't fight like that. He raised an eyebrow nonchalantly. Who told those punks to steal your money? No one gets to bully you. The young man raised his face, his gaze burning with passion and determination. As long as I'm here, you won't suffer a single injury. In the dream, Cynthia was in tears, unable to resist calling his name, Gilbert. Yet he seemed not to hear, holding the hand of her 14-year-old self as they turned and walked away. The scene abruptly flipped. In reality, Gilbert shielded Blanche, letting her get hit as blood stained his vision. She suddenly opened her eyes, tears soaking the pillow. Before she could even process it, the next moment, she saw in the hospital room, Blanche sobbing as she threw herself into Gilbert's arms. What do we do? It's all my fault. I shouldn't have pulled that rope. If I hadn't, Cynthia wouldn't have gotten hurt. Punish me, please. Gilbert helplessly wiped her tears. You really want to be punished? Blanche nodded with a sob. Yes. Mistakes must be punished. Otherwise I can't sleep. Gilbert chuckled softly, pinching her cheek. Then call me husband. Blanche froze. What? Say it. Her face flushed red as she whispered softly. Husband. Gilbert ruffled her hair gently, his voice tender. Since you call me husband, you should listen to me. I have my own way of handling this matter, so don't worry about it. Blanche could only obediently leave. Cynthia watched the scene quietly, her fingers unconsciously knocking over the water glass by the bedside. Slap. Gilbert turned around abruptly, only to realize she had woken up. He quickly approached, his eyes filled with concern. Cynthia, how are you? Are you in pain anywhere? He held her hand, his tone remorseful. I'm sorry, it was so chaotic back then. I mistook you for someone else. Cynthia closed her eyes, choosing not to expose his lie. She just asked softly, Blanche. Gilbert's expression changed slightly, thinking she was looking to trouble Blanche. He quickly explained, she didn't mean to, but it was indeed her fault. I've already punished her severely. Cynthia recalled the scene where he made Blanche call him hubby, and thought, was this the punishment? That's indeed quite harsh. She said nothing. No angry questioning about why he mistook her for someone else. No hysterical accusations of his favoritism. Just calmly saying, I'm hungry. Gilbert froze. He stared into her eyes and finally noticed something amiss. She was too calm. Calm as a stagnant pool of water. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but Cynthia repeated, I'm hungry. It completely disrupted his train of thought. He could only suppress his unease and nod gently. All right, sweetheart. I'll go get you something to eat right away. Wait for me. He grabbed his car keys and hurried out. The moment the door closed, Cynthia's tears could no longer be held back, pouring down uncontrollably. But she immediately raised her hand to wipe them dry. She looked out the window. The sunlight was glaring, yet it couldn't penetrate her heart. Love makes one hysterical. Hatred makes one unwilling to stay silent. But now, she felt Gilbert. No love, nor hatred remained. Gilbert cancelled all his work and stayed by Cynthia's side in the hospital without leaving for a moment. He personally fed her meals, applied her medicine, and even woke up in the middle of the night to check if she had kicked off the blankets. Yet Cynthia remained unwaveringly calm. On the day of her hospital discharge, Gilbert felt she had been cooped up for too long and specially arranged a grand banquet to celebrate her recovery. The banquet hall was resplendent with gold and jade, champagne towers stacked like mountains, and guests adorned in elegant attire. Amidst the clinking of glasses, everyone watched with envy. Mr. Gilbert dotes on Miss Cynthia to the very core of his being. I heard all these gifts are limited editions, some even won by lighting the sky lantern at auctions. Cynthia is truly blessed. Cynthia stood at the center of the crowd, not a trace of a smile on her face. Gilbert finally couldn't hold back anymore, pulling her into a corner and whispering, still angry. His thumb gently stroked the inside of her wrist as he pleaded, I swear, I really mistook her for someone else at the time. What can I do to make you forgive me? Baby, just tell me. I'll do anything. Okay. Cynthia looked at him and suddenly smiled. All right. Fire Blanche. Gilbert looked slightly uneasy, softening his tone. Her family is struggling, with both parents ill. Why be so harsh? Cynthia gazed at him quietly. Just moments ago he said he'd do anything. Yet the moment Blanche was involved, he immediately backtracked. As she was about to speak, Gilbert's phone suddenly rang. It's Blanche, on the other end of the line. She was crying hysterically. Mr. Gilbert, save me. Someone sent a gang of thugs. They're going to assault me. Gilbert's face turned pale. What did you say? Where are you now? But the call had already ended. Gilbert's expression changed, and he immediately called back. But the call wouldn't go through. He suddenly turned to look at Cynthia, his gaze shifting from anxiety to suspicion, then to suppressed anger. Cynthia, where is Blanche? His voice was tight, still somewhat restrained. Cynthia's heart clenched violently. He didn't believe her. He didn't even need to verify before concluding it was her doing. Her voice trembled as she asked, "You suspect me?" "Not suspect." He rubbed his temples. "But she just said on the phone that someone was trying to bully her." "So what?" Cynthia said with a trembling voice. "You think I did it?" Gilbert fell silent for a moment, then said in a low voice, "I didn't say that. It's just that the situation is urgent now. You get this nervous just from one phone call from her." Cynthia suddenly laughed, but her eyes were icy cold. "Gilbert, what exactly is your relationship with her?" His brows furrowed even tighter. "This is a matter of life and death, and you choose now to be jealous." "Jealous?" Cynthia's voice was as light as a feather falling to the ground. "You think this is jealousy?" Gilbert took a deep breath, softening his tone as much as possible. "Cynthia, there's really nothing between us, but now she might be in trouble. Just tell me, was it you?" "It wasn't me." Cynthia cut him off, each word sharp as a blade. "I'll say it one last time. I don't know where she is, and I didn't have anyone touch her." Gilbert stared at her, the agitation in his eyes growing more evident. As time ticked by, Blanche's phone remained unreachable. Finally, he completely lost his patience, grabbing Cynthia's wrist with a force that nearly crushed her bones. "Cynthia, I told you I've already punished her. Why are you still doing this? Ruining a girl's innocence is the lowest of acts. I don't have time for your games. Tell me, where is Blanche?" Cynthia turned pale from the pain but stubbornly repeated, "I don't know. No matter how many times you ask. I don't know." Gilbert was utterly enraged. "Cynthia, it's like I never knew you at all." He violently shoved her away. Bang! Cynthia stumbled back several steps, her lower back slamming hard against the corner of a table, her forehead striking the sharp decorative edge. Blood instantly gushed out. Screams erupted around them. "Mr. Gilbert, MS. Cynthia is injured." But Gilbert turned a deaf ear. He walked out without looking back, speaking sharply into the phone. "Pull up the surveillance footage immediately. Track Blanche's last known location." Cynthia gripped the edge of the table and slowly stood up. Blood trickled down her temple, warm and sticky. Yet she felt no pain, compared to the agony of her heart being torn apart. What did this minor injury matter? She stared blankly at Gilbert's departing figure, then suddenly smiled. Why would he care about her now? Now his heart and eyes are completely filled with Blanche, just as they were once completely filled with her. People rushed over in panic, wanting to help her to the hospital, but she gently shook her head, pushed away all helping hands, and walked out of the banquet hall alone. Boom! The moment she stepped out, a deafening explosion suddenly erupted behind her. Cynthia turned around and saw the gilded plaque inscribed with, "Gilbert loves Cynthia forever," crash heavily to the ground, shattering into two pieces. She looked at the plaque and suddenly burst into laughter. As she laughed, tears began to fall. "Gilbert, your lifetime. Turns out, it was so short." Cynthia went home alone. She silently tended to the wound on her forehead, then began packing her things. Gilbert's gifts, the necklace, the ring, the watch, the handwritten cards, the photo albums they'd filled together. Every trace of him was packed into cardboard boxes and carried downstairs, one trip after another, to be tossed into the dumpster. As the last box left her hands, the night wind swirled with snowflakes against her cheeks. She stood under the streetlight, suddenly finding it ridiculous. What was once treasured as precious memories had now become nothing more than trash in a dumpster. The moment she turned around, a burlap sack was suddenly pulled over her head. Before she could even struggle, a sharp pain shot through the back of her neck, and everything went black as she completely lost consciousness. When she woke up again, Cynthia found herself still trapped in a burlap sack, her hands tied behind her back and her mouth tightly gagged with a cloth. Through the gaps in the sack, she saw Gilbert holding Blanche as they sat on a high-backed sofa, surrounded by bodyguards. A bodyguard respectfully reported, "Mr. Gilbert, we caught the person. This is the gang leader MS." Cynthia said to Erasmus, "Blanche." Blanche shrank into Gilbert's arms and said timidly, "Gilbert, maybe let it go. You came in time, and nothing really happened to me." Gilbert sneered. No way. His slender fingers gently brushed across Blanche's face as he spoke in an unbelievably tender tone. I can't bear to lay a finger on Cynthia. But since she dared to bully you, I must give you an explanation. Since this is someone she brought in, I'll make an example of them to warn her against doing such things in the future. Cynthia felt a chill run through her body. She finally understood. All of this was Blanche's own staged performance. Blanche pretended to be bullied by thugs, then bribed someone to kidnap her, deceiving Gilbert into believing she was the ringleader who had tormented her, all to make Gilbert torture her unknowingly. She struggled desperately, trying to call out Gilbert's name, but her mouth was gagged, leaving only faint whimpers. Blanche, soft-heartedly, sighed. Then, go easy on her. After all, she's mess. Cynthia's subordinate. Gilbert turned cold. Easy. Impossible. Dare to bully you. I'll make him understand what it means to live a fate worse than death. The next second, Cynthia was dragged onto the high platform. Below was a swimming pool over 10 meters deep, its icy surface reflecting the pale, ghastly light. With a sack over her head and ropes binding her, she was abruptly pushed off the edge of the platform. Bang! The icy water instantly flooded into the sack, the tremendous force striking her internal organs like a sledgehammer. Water rushed violently into her nose and mouth, choking her until her vision darkened. Her lungs felt as if pierced by countless needles, the pain forcing her to instinctively curl up. Help! Help! The faint cries for help were drowned by the water. The sack soaked up water, growing heavier and heavier, dragging her down like a lead weight. She struggled desperately, but the rope only tightened around her, nearly choking the life out of her. Just as her consciousness was about to fade, the rope suddenly pulled taut, yanking her violently out of the water. Cough, cough, cough. She coughed violently. Water from her lungs mixed with streaks of blood spraying out. Before she could catch her breath, she was pushed down again. Once, twice, 3 times. Each descent felt like being thrown into an ice cave. Each pull-up like having her tendons torn and skin flayed. Over and over. A fate worse than death. Cynthia's consciousness grew increasingly hazy, leaving only a buzzing roar in her ears. Her lungs burned with a searing pain, as if they might burst at any second. After being pulled up for who knows how many times, Blanche finally relented and called out, "Enough. Gilbert, stop tormenting him." Gilbert sneered coldly. "It's not over yet." He took the iron rod handed to him by a bodyguard and walked up to Cynthia. "Anyone who dares to touch my people will pay the price." Bang! The first heavy blow landed on her back. Cynthia arched her entire body violently, like a shrimp struck by electricity. Excruciating pain exploded from her spine, instantly spreading to every limb. She clenched the cloth strip in her mouth tightly, yet a muffled groan still escaped. Bang! 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 Blow after blow, without mercy. Every strike felt like it was going to shatter her bones and rupture her organs. Cynthia could feel the warm liquid seeping from the corner of her mouth, dripping down her chin onto the ground. 99 strikes. He delivered them himself. As the beating continued, Cynthia could no longer feel the pain. Her consciousness began to blur, and darkness flickered before her eyes. Her body felt as if it had been torn to pieces, or thrown into a meat grinder. When the final blow landed, she collapsed limply to the ground like a rag doll. The pool of blood beneath her kept expanding, soaking her clothes and staining the floor red. Click! He raised his polished leather shoe and mercilessly crushed her exposed fingers. The sound of snapping finger bones was unmistakable. Cynthia convulsed in pain, yet couldn't even let out a scream. Gilbert finally withdrew his foot with satisfaction, turned, and pulled Blanche into his embrace. His slender fingers gently stroked her long hair. "Were you frightened? All right. It's over." He waved at the bodyguard as if disposing of trash. "Throw this one back." With that, he picked up Blanche and walked away without looking back, his leather shoes making a sticky sound as they stepped through the pool of blood. Cynthia finally had the gag loosened from her mouth. With her last ounce of strength, she hoarsely called out his name. Her voice was as faint as a candle flickering in the wind, yet it drained all her remaining energy. His footsteps abruptly halted, but Blanche timely fainted, leaning weakly against his shoulder. "Gilbert, my head hurts so much." Gilbert immediately averted his gaze, dismissing the earlier illusion, and held her tightly in panic. "I'll take you to the hospital right away." He strode away without looking back. Cynthia watched his retreating figure and suddenly smiled. As she smiled, Tears mingled with blood streamed down her face. If only he would turn his head and look. Just one glance. And he would realize that the person he's tormenting half to death now was once the one he held dear in his heart. But he didn't. His eyes were completely filled with Blanche. Cynthia, when she regained consciousness, she found herself thrown onto the floor of the villa, soaked to the skin. Her bones ached as if they had been crushed. She struggled to get up, each movement sending a tearing pain through the wounds on her back. Her fingers were swollen beyond recognition, the broken knuckles a terrifying shade of purple. The phone vibrated in the pocket, her hands trembling. She pulled it out and saw 2 messages. The first one was from Gilbert. "Baby, I was wrong before. I shouldn't have lost my temper with you. I just didn't want you to make a mistake. I've been taking care of Blanche at the hospital these days, so I won't be coming back. I'll come back to be with you after she gets better." Cynthia stared at the screen and suddenly burst into tears with laughter. How ridiculous. He had tormented her half to death, yet could still casually call her baby. He hadn't even noticed she was missing. The second item is a notification of successful identity cancellation. MS. Cynthia, your submitted application for identity cancellation and name change has been approved and takes effect immediately. Cynthia clutched her phone tightly, her knuckles turning white. She could finally leave. She struggled to her feet, changed into clean clothes, and picked up the suitcase she had packed long ago. Everything in this house that belonged to her, she took with her, except for 2 things. The first item is Gilbert's necklace gifted when he was 18. Hidden inside the pendant was a tiny surveillance device. When he gave it to her, he said, "Cynthia, I want to know what you're doing at all times." Back then she found it sweet, but now it only feels ironic. He probably hasn't checked it in a long time, has he? But as long as he sees it, he will know. It was he who personally pushed her off the high diving platform again and again. It was he who personally struck her 99 times with a rod. It was he who personally crushed her finger bones underfoot. The second item was the love letters he wrote while pursuing her. A thick stack, the yellowed pages still bearing the handwriting of his youth. "Cynthia, today I saw you wearing a white dress, and my heart raced so fast I thought I might die. Cynthia, let's get married after you graduate. Okay. I can't wait a single day longer. Cynthia, I will love you forever, and only you." Cynthia gently traced the words, suddenly recalling that year when she was 18, how he had pressed her against the wall with reddened eyes and said, "Cynthia, I can't live without you." Those once heart-fluttering vows that kept her awake at night now seemed utterly absurd. Word by word, Cynthia placed the necklace and love letter on the coffee table, then turned and walked away without hesitation. Before leaving the house, she threw her phone into the trash, burying all the past along with it. From now on, there will no longer be a Gilbert in this world who would shed tears for Cynthia. As the plane took off, Cynthia gazed at the shrinking city lights outside the window, and in a daze, she saw the 18-year-old Gilbert standing in the clouds, smiling at her. The next second, excruciating pain exploded from between her ribs. The illusion vanished, and she bit her lip hard, the taste of blood spreading in her mouth. "Ma'am, do you need any help?" The man in the adjacent seat put down his magazine, keenly noticing the cold sweat on her temple. Cynthia shook her head and buried her face deeper into the scarf. It still carried the musty smell of the basement, a cheap item she had hastily bought in the airport restroom. "I'm fine," she said softly, her voice barely audible, just a bit airsick. Hayden stared at the young woman who exuded an unsettling incongruity. She wore an obviously oversized camel-colored trench coat, with a visible ring mark on her left ring finger, while her right hand was unnaturally twisted. Most disturbingly, even in the 26-degree cabin, she couldn't stop trembling involuntarily. "I'm a doctor." Hayden handed her a tissue. "You look terrible." Cynthia, as she took the tissue, he noticed the bruises on the inner side of her wrist, marks left only by professional restraints. Hayden realized this was no ordinary domestic violence victim. "Thank you." Cynthia clutched the tissue in her palm but didn't use it. She couldn't afford to leave any traces behind, especially not now. But once the plane lands, Gilbert could turn the world upside down and still wouldn't find her. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot up from her abdomen. Cynthia saw black spots as warm liquid gushed from her nose. She instinctively reached to touch it, her fingertips meeting a sticky crimson. Hayden yanked off his seatbelt. "Flight attendant, we need emergency medical assistance here." In her blurred vision, Cynthia saw the man's slender fingers swiftly unbuttoning her collar. How strange that she should think of Gilbert's hands at this moment. Those same hands that had undone Blanche's buttons last night. Cynthia felt herself lifted by countless hands. Like a leaf adrift on a storm-tossed sea. She remembered the sensation of being pushed into the pool. The stabbing pain of icy water flooding her lungs. The burning scrape of burlap fibers against her cheeks. The most painful part was Gilbert's words. Those who dare touch what's mine will pay the price. Each syllable felt like a blunt knife slowly carving her heart. In the final moment before consciousness faded, Cynthia heard her own hoarse laughter. How ironic. Gilbert had personally shattered the rib that was now piercing her lung. He always vowed to protect her from any harm, yet ended up becoming the one who hurt her the most. The cabin lights swayed overhead. Hayden's shirt soaked through with sweat. This complete stranger was slowly losing her life in his hands, and some inexplicable intuition prevented him from standing idly by. The flight attendant whispered, "Doctor, do we need to make an emergency landing?" The unconscious Cynthia suddenly convulsed violently. Hayden held her down and turned to the flight attendant, saying, "Contact the airport to prepare an ambulance. The patient has multiple fractures and internal bleeding." Requiring. Before he could finish, his wrist was suddenly grabbed. Those unfocused eyes miraculously sharpened for a moment. Hayden saw them filled with a terrifying determination. "No. Hospital." Cynthia uttered each word with blood frothing at the corners of her mouth. "Please." Hayden froze, then nodded as if compelled by some unseen force. "I have a convalescent home in the suburbs." She woke up to the smell of disinfectant. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting patterns on the bedsheet. Cynthia stared blankly at the ceiling, unable to distinguish between reality and dream, until a deep male voice came from beside her. "Awake." She turned her head abruptly, meeting a pair of calm eyes. The man held a medical record in his hand. Seeing her awake, he casually closed it and spoke in a composed tone. "You had internal bleeding and lost consciousness on the plane. I performed emergency treatment. How do you feel now?" Cynthia instinctively touched her abdomen. The pain had lessened considerably, but a dull ache still lingered beneath her skin. She opened her mouth, her voice hoarse. "Thank you." The man nodded and handed her a cup of warm water. "My name is Hayden, and I'm a doctor. This is my private sanatorium. Very safe." The cup was warm, and Cynthia unconsciously rubbed the rim with her fingertips. She lowered her eyes in silence for a moment before speaking softly. "Lynn. My name is Lynn." Cynthia settled into the sanatorium. Hayden would come for daily rounds, but beyond necessary medical inquiries, he never pried into her privacy, until one day during a dressing change, the nurse accidentally knocked over the tray. The clatter of metal instruments hitting the floor made Cynthia jolt violently, reflexively curling into a protective ball. Hayden's hand froze mid-air. He watched her instinctive movement to shield her ribs, his gaze sweeping over the lingering bruises on her wrist before speaking abruptly. "These injuries weren't caused by an accident." Cynthia's breath caught. Hayden didn't press further, just calmly adjusted her collar for her, speaking softly, "If you don't want to talk, you don't have to answer. But if you need help, the lawyers and police here can assist you." Cynthia clutched the bedsheet tightly and shook her head. Hayden said nothing more. As he turned to leave, Cynthia suddenly called out to him, "Thank you." He turned back and saw a faint smile appear on her pale face. "But really, there's no need." The days at the sanatorium passed with a tranquility that felt almost unreal. Cynthia's health gradually improved, and she would occasionally go to the garden to bask in the sun. One afternoon, as she passed by the conference room, she unintentionally overheard Hayden arguing with someone. "The other party is adamant about this price. We can't possibly make any concessions, but the market data clearly shows their valuation is inflated by at least 30%. Cynthia paused mid-step, as if compelled by some unseen force. She pushed the door open, and all eyes turned toward her. Hayden frowned. "Lynn." Cynthia pressed her lips together, then pointed at the financial statement on the projection screen. After a moment, she spoke. "There's an issue with the cash flow forecast on page 3. They've hidden some of the debt. If calculated this way, the actual premium should be increased by 15%. The meeting room fell into complete silence. Hayden stared at her for a few seconds before suddenly pushing the document forward. "Continue." The next day, Hayden slid a contract in front of her. "The merger case is resolved. If you're interested, you can join my company as a strategic consultant." Cynthia paused in surprise, then suddenly smiled. "Aren't you afraid I might be a corporate spy?" Hayden leaned against the desk, looking at her with a calm tone. I've checked your background. Of course, I found nothing. But my intuition tells me you're trustworthy. In the VIP hospital room, the smell of disinfectant was masked by the fragrance of lilies placed nearby. Gilbert sat by the bed, holding a bowl of steaming chicken soup, the spoon lightly tapping the rim with a crisp sound. Blanche. One more sip. He brought the spoon to Blanche's lips, his voice so tender it could melt. I simmered it for 4 hours, skimming off all the fat. Blanche, a faint blush rose on her pale face as she took small sips from his hand, her eyelashes casting a shadow under the light. Gilbert, you staying here with me? Will Ms. Cynthia mind? She won't mind. Gilbert interrupted her, his tone so certain it sounded like he was convincing himself. Cynthia is the most understanding. But as he set down the bowl, the porcelain spoon clinked abruptly against the glass coffee table with a sharp ding. The sound pierced his temple like a sudden needle. It's been 3 days. 3 days without Cynthia's news. He pulled out his phone. The lock screen lit up, showing Cynthia's serene sleeping face. 1703. Baby, I'll be back later. 2247. Still angry. Next day 0915. Cynthia answers the phone. The last message was left this morning. A green bubble hanging alone at the top of the chat window. I'm going to make a phone call. He suddenly stood up, his suit pants knocking over the low stool. At the end of the hallway in the fire escape, Gilbert pressed the dial button for the 3rd time. The mechanical female voice repeated the words. No one is available to answer at the moment, in both Chinese and English, creating an eerie echo in the empty stairwell. He dialed his assistant's number again. Chen, go to the villa now. He pondered for a moment, not mentioning the need to confirm Cynthia's location, only saying it was to check the villa's access control situation. About half an hour later, the assistant replied with a message. Mr. Gilbert, the villa's security system shows everything is normal. Except, what is it? The kitchen waste disposal hasn't been activated for 3 days. The smart assistant records show the last usage was the day you left home. Gilbert's breath caught for a moment. Cynthia is a neat freak who would never let kitchen waste stay overnight. The fingerprint lock emitted its familiar beep, and the entryway sensor light flickered on in response. But the pitch-black darkness before him held no light, and from the moment he opened the door, the villa remained eerily silent. Cynthia. His voice echoed through the vaulted living room. No one responded. The faint scent of roses in the air had completely dissipated, replaced by a cold sense of emptiness. Gilbert stood at the entrance of the master bedroom in the villa, his heart inexplicably racing as a sense of panic crept over him. As he slowly pushed the door open, the sight before him made his eyes widen involuntarily. The wardrobe was wide open, with not a single piece of her clothing left. On the dressing table, her frequently used perfume and jewelry box had all vanished. The framed photo that once sat by the bedside was gone too, leaving only a lonely empty frame in its place. His heart sank abruptly. He hurried to the study, pulled open the drawer. Passport, ID card, bank cards, everything that could prove her existence had disappeared. Only 2 objects lay quietly on the coffee table. A necklace, and a stack of yellowed love letters. Gilbert tremblingly picked up the necklace with his shaking hands. This was what he had given Cynthia on her 18th birthday. All these years, she had never taken it off. And now, Cynthia is nowhere to be found. Leaving this necklace all alone here, Gilbert dared not believe the worst possibility. He took out his phone and dialed his assistant's number again. Go and investigate Cynthia's whereabouts immediately. Use all connections. Turn every stone to find her. The voice on the other end responded promptly. And for a moment, all he could hear was the sound of keyboard typing. Gilbert had never felt time pass so slowly. After a moment, the assistant's hesitant voice sounded. Mr. Gilbert, Ms. Cynthia's identity information has been deactivated. Deactivated identity. Cynthia, why would she suddenly choose to deactivate her identity? What exactly happened during the time he was away? Gilbert, his eyelashes trembled, and his palms unconsciously tightened, turning deathly pale. The stinging pain in his palm reminded him. Right, there's also the necklace. The necklace might contain clues about Cynthia's whereabouts. He abruptly turned and rushed to the study, pulling up the footage. But the surveillance footage that appeared before his eyes left Gilbert's mind completely blank. In the footage, Blanche stood at the edge of the high platform, a cold smile playing at the corners of her mouth, while the person in the sack struggled The moment the fabric slipped away, he saw that face clearly. Gilbert's breath stopped. A pale face, disheveled long hair, and blood seeping from the corners of the mouth. That was Cynthia. She gazed in his direction, her lips trembling as if wanting to say something, only to be pushed down by his own hands the next second. Bang! The sound of splashing water echoed in the surveillance room, while Gilbert's ears were filled only with a sharp ringing. He clutched the necklace desperately, his knuckles turning white, a metallic taste rising in his throat. Suddenly, Gilbert seemed to realize something. He dragged the progress bar, then abruptly stopped his finger. Blanche's smile was so obvious at the corners of her mouth, as if mocking the Gilbert in front of the screen. He stared fixedly at this now unfamiliar face, his breathing gradually becoming rapid. At that moment, the phone rang again. Mr. Gilbert, the hospital. The assistant's voice came through the phone, but he abruptly cut it off. Get the car ready. His voice was hoarse beyond recognition. I'm going there now. The tires screeched sharply against the pavement. Don't worry, he won't find out. I destroyed that bitch's medical records long ago. Yes, the surveillance at the villa has been taken care of too. Serves her right for not knowing her place. Each word was like a needle dipped in poison, piercing through the last shred of his self-deceiving hope until it was riddled with holes. The hospital room door was flung open violently. Gilbert stood at the doorway, his face terrifyingly dark. Blanche's phone clattered to the ground. Gilbert, how did you? You knew that was Cynthia. Gilbert's voice was hoarse and terrifying, like a demon crawling out from hell. Blanche's face instantly turned deathly pale, her fingers unconsciously clutching the sheets. I don't know what you're talking about. That person in the burlap sack. He grabbed her wrist with such force it seemed he might crush her bones. You knew it was her all along, didn't you? Blanche's tears instantly welled up. Gilbert, you're hurting me. Gilbert turned a deaf ear, his bloodshot eyes fixed on her. Answer me. I just love you too much. She sobbed, her voice broken and fragmented. I was afraid she would take you away. I couldn't help it. Gilbert cast a look of disgust at Blanche, then released his grip as if he had touched something filthy. His gaze swept around briefly before finally settling on the fruit knife on the bedside table. The cold light reflected off the blade revealed his twisted expression, as well as Blanche's suddenly terrified eyes. You can't. She stumbled backward in panic, the four-stand crashing to the ground with a loud thud. Gilbert's office was bathed in cold, white light. Before him lay numerous spread-out documents, detailing how she had secretly sowed discord between him and Cynthia over the years. Among them was a stack of files delivered by a private investigator. Photos, audio recordings, transaction records, and even testimonies from those so-called thugs were included. It was a mess. Blanche, who hired us, said to stage a scene, paid us enough. She told us to pretend we were going to bully her, but we never actually intended to follow through. She said as long as Mr. Gilbert believed it, there'd be extra payment afterward. Gilbert's knuckles turned white, his eyes dark with unreadable emotions. From beginning to end, it was all Blanche's self-directed performance. And he, just like that, pushed the one he deeply loved into the abyss. Blanche was escorted into the office by bodyguards, still wearing a coquettish smile. Gilbert, why are you in such a hurry to see me? Before she could finish speaking, a stack of documents was hurled violently at her face. Explain. Gilbert's voice was as cold as ice. Papers were scattered all over the floor. Blanche glanced down at the photos and bank statements, her smile freezing instantly. I can explain. She frantically crouched down to pick them up, her fingers trembling. Someone must be framing me. It must be Cynthia. She hates me. So, Cynthia. Gilbert stared fixedly at the person before him, his tone unexpectedly calm. He took out a voice recorder from the drawer and pressed play. That bitch deserves it. Who told her not to know her place? Blanche's voice echoed through the office, sharp and venomous. Her face instantly turned deathly pale. Blanche forced a smile, tossing the documents aside as she slowly approached Gilbert. Gilbert, believe me, I really didn't do those things. Facing Gilbert's icy gaze, her breathing grew increasingly rapid. Believe me, I love you so much. Love? Gilbert questioned in confusion, reaching out to grip Blanche's chin. After doing such a thing, you still claim to love me. Doesn't it disgust you? And what makes you think you're any better? Blanche suddenly raised her head, all traces of fragility in her eyes replaced by twisted hatred. Gilbert, you were the one who sought me out first. You treated me as a substitute. You made me believe you loved me. She violently broke free from his grasp, pointing at his nose with a cold laugh. You're blind, unable to tell who's genuine and who's fake. Who are you pretending to be devoted to now? Cynthia abandoned you long ago. She'd rather give up everything and flee far away than spare you another glance. Gilbert's pupils constricted abruptly, his chest as if struck by a heavy hammer. Blanche smiled with increasing mockery. Do you know what she left behind? That necklace. It was from you, wasn't it? You've seen the surveillance footage inside. Wasn't every single strike delivered by your own hand? The air fell dead silent for a few seconds. Gilbert suddenly laughed. He rose slowly to his feet and walked over to Blanche, reaching out to caress her face, his touch as gentle as a lover's, yet his eyes chillingly cold. You're right, I was blind, he said softly. So now, it's time to correct that mistake. Blanche hadn't even processed what was happening when the office door opened again. 2 bodyguards strode straight toward her, binding her tightly with coarse hemp ropes. Blanche widened her eyes in shock, nearly knocked off balance by the brute force. Gilbert, you can't do this to me. I can return that money to you. Gilbert took a step back, watching her handcuffed hands with an expressionless face. Return. You think I care about that little money? He leaned close to her ear, his voice as light as a serpent's hiss. I'll make you taste what it means to wish for death. Gilbert stood in the psychiatric hospital corridor, the cold fluorescent lights stretching his shadow long and thin. He still held that document in his hand, the one that detailed Blanche's years of crimes, embezzlement, commercial fraud, intentional harm, and even how she meticulously framed Cynthia. The hospital room door was pushed open. Blanche huddled in the corner, her face still wrapped in bandages, the scars left from her self-inflicted wounds. She looked up and saw Gilbert, a glimmer of hope flashing in her eyes. Gilbert, are you here to save me? She crawled forward a few steps, but her frail body couldn't support the movement. Blanche lay on the ground, covered in filth, her fingers still clutching Gilbert's pant leg. Gilbert did not answer, only slowly crouched before her, looking down at her with a gaze as cold as ice. His voice was low and calm. Blanche, do you know why I'm here? Blanche shook her head tremblingly, tears streaming down. I know I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. Wrong. Gilbert let out a cold laugh and threw the documents in front of her. Is this what you call knowing you were wrong? Blanche glanced down at the contents of the documents, her face instantly turning deathly pale. She shook her head frantically. No, I didn't do these. Someone framed me. Gilbert. You believe me. You believe me. Framed. Gilbert leaned down, gripping her chin with such force it seemed he might crush her bones. You think I'd still believe your lies? He released her, pulling out a handkerchief to wipe his hands, his face filled with disgust. This action deeply wounded Blanche's eyes. Her pupils contracted sharply as she lunged at Gilbert, only to be kicked away. She fell to the ground, screaming hysterically. Gilbert, you can't do this to me. I loved you so much. Everything I did was for you. For me. Gilbert's expression turned completely cold. For your own selfish desires. You destroyed everything between me and Cynthia. Is this for me? Since that's the case, it's my turn to do something for you. He turned and nodded to the doctor at the door. From today onward, I will personally oversee her treatment plan. The doctor respectfully handed over a new medical record. Gilbert opened the first page, which read, Patient No. 0487. Treatment plan. Electroshock therapy. Medication control. Lifetime confinement. Blanche struggled frantically. No. You can't do this to me. Gilbert. I curse you. May you never receive Cynthia's forgiveness. Gilbert left the hospital room without looking back, the sound of Blanche's heart-wrenching cries following behind him. He stood in the corridor, lighting a cigarette. Amidst the swirling smoke, his gaze was inscrutable. An assistant approached cautiously. Mr. Gilbert, as per your instructions, the Ferdinand family's assets have been completely frozen, and Blanche's parents have been placed under movement restrictions to ensure they cannot locate Miss Ferdinand. The patient. Gilbert responded with a faint, leak her embezzlement scandal to the media. I want to ruin her reputation completely. The assistant nodded and left. Gilbert stubbed out his cigarette and gazed at the night sky outside the window. He knew this revenge was far from enough to compensate for Cynthia's suffering, but at least, he wouldn't let Blanche have another chance to hurt anyone. Gilbert stood in front of the villa where he and Cynthia had once lived together. The surveillance footage in his hand already reviewed countless times. But the surveillance footage had already been wiped clean, leaving not a single useful clue. Keep searching. His voice was hoarse, eyes bloodshot. Turn all of City A upside down if you have to. Just find her. The assistant tremblingly handed over a document. Mr. Gilbert, M.S. Cynthia's identity records have been deleted, and her immigration records erased. Gilbert clenched his fist violently, knuckles turning white. He frantically mobilized all his connections, even going so far as to offer an exorbitant reward. But Cynthia vanished without a trace, as if she had evaporated from the face of the earth. He went to every place they had ever been together. The high school campus, the amusement park, the mountaintop temple, even the foreign city where she had once studied abroad. But each time, he came up empty-handed. He began to dream frequently. In his dreams, Cynthia stood in a pool of blood, staring coldly at him. Gilbert, you pushed me into hell with your own hands. He woke with a start, his shirt soaked in cold sweat, his heart aching as if a piece had been brutally torn out. Gilbert began expanding his search, even neglecting company affairs. He flew from one country to another, hoping to catch a glimpse of that familiar figure. 3 months later, Gilbert stood outside a luxury boutique on Avenue Montaigne, staring blankly at the wedding dress in the window. Cynthia once said that she preferred simple satin wedding dresses. No lace, no diamonds, just the purest white. He gave a self-deprecating tug at the corner of his mouth. Those past events had already dissipated like bubbles. And now, he didn't even know where Cynthia was. Suddenly, a familiar figure caught the corner of his eye. Her jet black hair cascaded like a waterfall. Her slender silhouette, the way she walked, it was exactly like the person in his dreams. His heart suddenly clenched, and he instinctively chased after her. Cynthia. The woman didn't turn back, continuing to walk forward. He quickened his pace, reaching out to grab her wrist. But the next second, a black car pulled up in front of her. The door opened, and a man in a suit took her bag, whispering something in her ear that made her chuckle softly. As his profile was revealed, it was a completely unfamiliar face. Gilbert froze in place. It wasn't her, just a similar figure from behind. He dropped his hand in dejection, his throat tightening. The phone rang, and the assistant's cautious voice came through. Mr. Gilbert, the banquet is about to begin. Gilbert closed his eyes briefly, hung up the phone, and turned to leave. Just as he turned away, in the coffee shop at the street corner, Cynthia slowly set down her cup, her gaze coolly sweeping over his retreating figure. Hayden followed her line of sight. Is that him? Cynthia withdrew her gaze and gave a slight nod. She stood up, linking her arm with Hayden's. Let's go. It's time for the banquet. Cynthia stood before the floor-length mirror, tilting her head slightly to adjust the diamond stud on her earlobe, a faint smile curling at the corner of her lips. Gilbert will also attend this private banquet tonight. Hayden's voice came from behind as he handed her a glass of champagne. Your attention has been on him all along. Could it be you came here for him? Cynthia took the glass, her fingertips lightly tapping the rim, producing a crisp sound. You're overthinking it. At the banquet venue, the crystal chandelier refracted dazzling light and shadow. Cynthia held a champagne glass, effortlessly conversing with representatives from several European financial groups. Her fluent French and sharp business insights made her the center of attention. Gilbert entered the venue, his gaze involuntarily drawn to that figure. There was a familiar sharpness in every movement. He slightly furrowed his brows and was about to approach when the other person happened to turn around, brushing past him. At that moment, he caught a faint whiff of rose fragrance. Gilbert whirled around, but the figure had already vanished into the crowd. Who was that lady just now? He stopped a waiter, his voice tense. The waiter smiled. That was Miss Lynn, founder of the emerging investment firm New York. Gilbert's pupils suddenly contracted. New York. He couldn't believe it, yet couldn't help hoping that it was Cynthia who had returned. This was the third time Hayden noticed Cynthia's unusual attention towards Homer Group. He stood at the study door, watching her slender back remain rigid under the desk lamp, the pen in her hand leaving sharp marks on the paper. It didn't look like she was analyzing data, more like dissecting the enemy. Reading Homer's report again, Hayden walked in with a cup of hot milk, deliberately making his footsteps more noticeable. Cynthia's fingers trembled almost imperceptibly as she quickly closed the folder. Just routine analysis. she said, taking the milk with a perfectly practiced smile. Getting to know our future competition in advance. Hayden didn't expose her lie. Although over the past 3 months, she had researched Homer Group far more frequently than any other company, sometimes even staying up until dawn. But whenever he tried to ask, she would quickly change the subject, especially after that one-sided meeting in Paris. Don't stay up too late, he finally said, setting down his cup. There's an early meeting tomorrow. Cynthia nodded, but her gaze had already drifted back to the stack of documents. Hayden, as he closed the study door, he heard the scratching sound of a pen on paper once more, as if it were the physical manifestation of some obsession. At 3:17 in the morning, a sharp scream shattered the silence of the villa. Hayden bolted upright in bed, his doctor's instincts snapping him awake instantly. The sound came from Cynthia's bedroom. He rushed over without even taking time to put on his slippers. Pushing open the door, the sight before him made his heart clench violently. Cynthia was curled up in the corner between the headboard and the wall, her hands gripping her own neck tightly, her face as pale as paper. Her nightgown was soaked with cold sweat, clinging to her gaunt back, her entire body trembling like a leaf in the wind. What terrified Hayden the most were her eyes, her dilated pupils and unfocused gaze, as if she were staring at some horrifying scene that wasn't there. Lynn. Hayden knelt on one knee before her, not daring to touch her recklessly. Look at me. Can you hear me? No response. Cynthia's breathing grew increasingly rapid, her lips beginning to turn blue. Acute PTSD episode. Hayden quickly assessed the situation. He gently grasped Cynthia's wrist, feeling it cold and clammy with sweat. Breathe with me. He pressed her hand against his chest. Feel my breathing rhythm. Take it slow. Hayden deliberately slowed his breathing, his chest rising and falling rhythmically. He could feel a ring of uneven scars on the slender wrist beneath his palm. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Cynthia's breathing finally began to synchronize with his. Her pupils refocused, and upon recognizing the person before her, she abruptly withdrew her hand. I'm fine, she said hoarsely, instinctively pulling down her pajama sleeve to cover her wrist. Sorry, I just had a nightmare. Hayden didn't expose this clumsy lie. He stood up to pour a glass of warm water, casually adding a few drops of nerve-soothing essential oil to the diffuser nearby. Drink some water first. He handed it to her, deliberately maintaining a safe distance. I'll get you a dry towel. When he returned from the bathroom, Cynthia had already moved to the armchair by the window, holding the water cup with both hands, her gaze fixed on the night scene outside. Moonlight outlined the contours of her profile, her eyelashes casting a small shadow beneath her eyes. Hayden gently draped the towel over her shoulders and settled into the armchair across from her. Do you want to talk about that nightmare? He asked casually, as if merely discussing tomorrow's weather. Cynthia's fingers absently traced the rim of her cup. After a long silence, she suddenly spoke. Do you know what it feels like to drown? Hayden stiffened slightly. First, water rushed into my nostrils, burning like fire. Cynthia's voice was soft, as if recounting someone else's story. Then my lungs began to convulse, desperate for air but only inhaling more water. The most terrifying part, she lifted her gaze, was feeling your life slipping away so vividly, yet being utterly powerless to stop it. Hayden noticed the unnatural twist of her left ring finger, an inevitable deformity from a bone fracture that had never received proper treatment. I dreamed. Cynthia suddenly stood up and walked to the desk, retrieving a craft paper envelope from the bottom drawer. You should see this. Hayden took the heavy document folder. What spilled out were stacks of photographs, medical records, and a photocopy of a marriage certificate soaked and ruined by coffee. So this was your original nom. Hayden's words trailed off as everything before him left him stunned. Cynthia lay in a pool of blood, a gruesome wound on her forehead. The carpet beneath her stained a dark red. The medical report listed 3 fractured ribs, a shattered right index finger, pulmonary edema. This is Gilbert's masterpiece. Cynthia's voice was surprisingly calm. He was my ex-husband. Cynthia paused for a moment before shifting her gaze to the marriage certificate. No, we actually had no relationship at all. She smiled self-deprecatingly. He thought the person in the sack was the thug who bullied his wife, but the person inside was actually me. Hayden turned to the next page and saw surveillance footage of a tall man repeatedly pushing a sack-covered person off a high-diving platform, while a beautiful young woman stood nearby, smiling at the corner of her mouth. Blanche. Cynthia pointed at the woman, his lawful wife. And I was just a joke. Hayden finally understood where her obsession with the Homer Group came from. This wasn't ordinary business rivalry. It was bone-deep hatred. So you want to destroy him? It wasn't a question. Cynthia walked to the window, where moonlight stretched her shadow long. I want him to taste what it's like to have nothing. Her fingers lightly traced the windowpane. To lose his company, his reputation, everything. Her voice abruptly stopped. Hayden walked up behind her. Not touching, just quietly present. He said softly, "Revenge won't bring true peace. Then what will?" Cynthia turned abruptly, dark fire burning in her eyes. Forgiveness. Forgetting. She pulled open the collar of her nightgown, revealing a hideous scar below her collarbone. He did this with his own hands, using an iron rod. 99 strikes. He counted every single one. Hayden stared at the scar, then suddenly pulled her into his arms. Cynthia stiffened for a moment before collapsing against his chest as if all her strength had drained away. "I'm not trying to stop you." Hayden rested his chin atop her head. "I just don't want to watch hatred consume you." He gently held her misshapen fingers. "These scars, they shouldn't define your life." Cynthia did not answer, but Hayden felt the fabric on his chest gradually dampen. Outside the window, the eastern sky began to pale. Hayden looked down at the now calm Cynthia in his arms and made a decision. "Show me your plan," he said. "Every detail." Cynthia lifted her head, a flicker of surprise in her swollen eyes. "If this can truly help you let go and start anew." Hayden wiped the tear stains from her face. "I'll help you." As the first ray of sunlight filtered through the curtains, Cynthia was pointing at Homer Group's equity structure chart, explaining her acquisition strategy to Hayden. Her voice remained hoarse, but her eyes had regained clarity. Sunlight spilled over the scattered documents, illuminating the water-damaged marriage certificate. Cynthia glanced at it for a moment before casually tossing it into the wastebasket. Cynthia stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows on the top floor of New York Group, overlooking the entire city. The glass reflected her figure, her fingertips holding a glass of red wine, the dark red liquid gently swirling in the glass, eerily reminiscent of the color of the blood she had lain in that day. The assistant knocked and entered, respectfully handing her a document. "President Nan, Homer Group stock price has dropped another 5%. The market generally disapproves of Gilbert's recent decisions." Cynthia took the document, a cold smile curling at the corner of her lips. "Very well." She flipped through Homer's recent financial report, her fingertip lightly tapping on a particular line of numbers. "Gilbert has already sold off many of his assets to fill the financial hole left by Blanche's previous embezzlement. Continue selling off the Homer bonds we hold." She closed the file, her voice calm. The assistant hesitated. "But, if Homer crashes too quickly, we'll also lose part of our investment." Cynthia looked up, a sharp glint flashing in her eyes. "It doesn't matter. I don't care." All she cared about was Gilbert slowly losing everything he once held dear, just like everything she had lost before. Homer Group. Gilbert stared fixedly at the computer screen in his office. The stock price curve was plummeting, and shareholders' calls kept pouring in one after another. Overwhelmed by irritation, he muted them all. "Find out who's behind this manipulation," he said coldly to his assistant. Beads of cold sweat formed on the assistant's forehead. "We've already checked. The funds originated from a cutting-edge investment firm in Switzerland with deep connections. We haven't been able to trace the actual controller yet." Gilbert frowned, suddenly recalling something. The company's name. New York. He murmured the name repeatedly, as if he had figured something out, his pupils trembling slightly. "Cynthia." His pupils suddenly contracted, his fingers unconsciously tightening around the fountain pen, ink bleeding through the document. "Is it her? Has she returned?" Cynthia sat in the private booth, facing Homer's former financial director Henry. Henry rubbed his hands together, his eyes flickering. "Mr. Nan, the terms you promised me." Cynthia smiled faintly and slid a check across the table. "This is the deposit. You'll get the rest once the job is done." Henry greedily eyed the number on the check, nodding repeatedly. "Don't worry. Gilbert is planning to mortgage his core patents to stabilize the stock price, with just a little tweak from me." "No." Cynthia interrupted him, her voice soft yet firm. "I want you to help him." Henry was taken aback. "What? Help stabilize his stock price? Make him think the crisis is over?" She took a sip of red wine, a cold glint flashing in her eyes. "Then, when he's most relaxed, strike the fatal blow." The next day, Gilbert stared at the suddenly stabilized stock price. His brow furrowed. We found out it was Director Henry who contacted several institutions for funding. The assistant reported. Henry. Gilbert remained silent for a moment before suddenly sneering. Where did he get those connections? The assistant shook his head. Not sure. But the funds have indeed arrived, temporarily easing our pressure. Gilbert walked to the window. The city lights blazing in the night. He always felt something was off. Investigate. He turned around, his face showing no trace of relief from the stock price rebound. Find out Henry's connections with those institutions. And be quick. Outside the window. The night was heavy, like the calm before the storm. Cynthia took Hayden's offered document, glanced at it, and chuckled lightly. Gilbert is indeed suspicious. Hayden raised an eyebrow. Time to close the net. Wait a little longer. She closed the file and gazed at the night sky outside the window. I want him to come begging to me himself, just as she had once begged him to turn back. As it turned out, Gilbert's premonition was correct. Just as Homer's stock price was gradually stabilizing, those institutions seemed to have coordinated their actions, collectively withdrawing their investments. Homer Group's stock price plummeted, even reaching a historic low. Gilbert stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his hands gradually clenching into fists. His assistant behind him didn't dare to breathe loudly. Henry, V.E. lost contact with him. As these words fell, the office plunged into dead silence. The assistant's forehead was drenched in sweat. That wouldn't stop, and the information he uncovered made him certain that speaking up would likely end his career. Have you identified the owners of those institutions? It's finally come to this. The assistant closed his eyes for a moment, then placed the documents in his hand on the desk. Mr. Gilbert, our investigation shows that those investment institutions are backed by different companies. But those companies, all of them are subsidiaries of New York. Gilbert listened to this report with a sense of resigned inevitability. His intuition told him that New York was Cynthia. It was Cynthia coming for revenge. In that case, Gilbert stood at the foot of NY's company building, his suit slightly wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He has been waiting here for 3 days. The receptionist politely yet coldly rejected each of his appointment requests, while the security guards vigilantly stopped every attempt he made to force his way in. But he couldn't take it anymore. Move aside. His voice was terrifyingly low. Before the security guard could react, Gilbert had already shoved him aside and strode toward the elevator. Today, he absolutely had to see Cynthia. The door to the top-floor office was flung open violently. Cynthia sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, her back turned to him, the pen in her hand leaving a sharp mark on the document. Mr. Gilbert, she said without turning her head, her voice calm. Trespassing on private property is grounds for calling the police. Gilbert's breath hitched. That voice, the voice he'd heard countless times in his dreams, was now within arm's reach, yet as cold as a stranger's. Cynthia. He took a step forward, his voice hoarse. I know it's you. Cynthia finally turned around. Sunlight poured from behind her, outlining her slender silhouette. Her makeup was exquisite. The shadow of the girl who once shed tears for him seemed to have vanished without a trace. Lynn, she corrected him, lightly tapping the nameplate on the desk with her fingertip. Or you may address me as President Nan. Gilbert's chest heaved violently. Blanche's matter. I've already investigated it thoroughly. He strode forward, planting his hands on her desk. It was her. She orchestrated those scenes herself. She's been deceiving me all along. I truly thought that thug back then was someone you hired to harm her. Cynthia watched him quietly, not a ripple of emotion in her eyes. Gilbert's voice grew softer. If I had known it was you, how could I possibly? Possibly what? Cynthia suddenly laughed. Possibly push me off the high platform with your own hands. Possibly break my ribs with an iron rod. Or possibly crush my fingers under your feet. She picked up the remote control and pressed it lightly. The projection screen in the office slowly descended, revealing Cynthia's pale, blood-stained face as the burlap sack slid off. Meanwhile, Gilbert watched coldly, Blanche standing behind him with a triumphant smile curling at the corners of her mouth, and the iron rod falling. Cynthia's huddled body, and the faint sounds of pain. Gilbert's face instantly turned deathly pale. Shall I continue playing? Cynthia propped her chin, her tone casual. I have plenty more. Like the part where you held Blanche and made her call you husband. Gilbert was speechless. He stared at the cold expression before him, and the next second, His knees hit the ground with a heavy thud. "I'm sorry." His voice trembled, fingers gripping the edge of her desk tightly. "I really don't know." Cynthia looked down at him and suddenly found it ridiculous. The once lofty Gilbert now knelt before her like a stray dog. Gilbert squeezed his eyes shut. After a long silence, Gilbert looked up. "Cynthia, what will it take for you to forgive me?" Cynthia took a document from the drawer and pushed it toward him. "Homer Group Equity Acquisition Agreement. Sign it," she said calmly. "I'll buy all the shares you hold at market price." Gilbert froze. "You want to, Homer?" "No." Cynthia stood up, her high heels clicking crisply against the marble floor. She leaned down, lightly tapping the contract with her fingertip. "What I want is for you to personally deliver Homer into my hands." She made no attempt to hide her true intentions, and then watches it slowly, bit by bit, destroyed by me. Gilbert's trembling fingertips brushed against the contract. He knew what this meant. Sign it, and Homer's legacy built over decades would change hands forever. Refuse, and he'd lose any chance to win her back. Cynthia watched his struggle and suddenly found it all rather dull. "I'll give you 3 days to think it over." She turned and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window, her back cold and distant. "But Gilbert, don't forget, right now, you're in no position to negotiate with me." Homer at the top-floor conference room of the group. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the brightly lit cityscape beyond. Cynthia sat at the head of the table, her fingertips lightly tapping the surface, with stacks of asset division agreements awaiting her signature spread before her. On either side of the conference table, executives who once groveled before Gilbert now kept their heads bowed, their breaths so shallow they seemed afraid to disturb her train of thought. "Sell off the new energy division. Merge the healthcare sector into the group," she said, her tone as calm as if discussing the weather. "As for the remaining shell, let it stay." The CFO cautiously asked, "President Lin, what about the Homer brand?" Cynthia lifted her gaze, a cold curve forming at the corner of her lips. "Homer." She slowly stood up, her high heels clicking against the marble floor, the crisp sound like a warning bell echoing in everyone's hearts. "From today onward, there is no more Homer." She raised her hand and pushed the final document toward the silent man at the end of the table. The document slid over to Gilbert, its cover boldly displaying the words, "Position Adjustment Notice." He was to retain the title of president, but all decision-making authority was stripped away, requiring him to submit daily work reports to Cynthia. Gilbert stared at the document, his fingers trembling slightly, yet he made no move to take it. Cynthia looked at him and suddenly smiled. "What's the matter, Mr. Gilbert?" Not satisfied. The meeting room fell into complete silence. Gilbert slowly raised his head, his once sharp, eagle-like black eyes now dull and lifeless, as if all vitality had been drained from them. He remained silent for a few seconds before finally reaching out to pick up the pen and signing his name on the document. "Mr. Gilbert, your daily report." The secretary placed a document on Gilbert's desk, her tone respectful, yet her eyes filled with pity. Gilbert numbly flipped it open. "Homer Group Maintenance Progress Report." It contains detailed records of the daily number of times the company sign is wiped, the watering status of office plants, number of visitors received at the front desk, 0. He closed his eyes briefly and signed his name. "This is Cynthia's request." He had to sign it personally to confirm that he was diligently managing this shell company every day. In the open-air cafe, Cynthia carefully cut the steak on her plate, the knife scraping lightly against the porcelain. "Your steak-cutting technique is still as brutal as ever." Hayden chuckled, reaching over to take her plate and effortlessly slicing it into smaller pieces, "like you're dissecting an enemy." Cynthia raised an eyebrow. "What if I am?" Hayden pushed the plate back, his fingertips lightly brushing the back of her hand. "How does revenge taste?" Cynthia gazed at the lake, where sunlight shattered into countless golden flakes on the water's surface. "More hollow than I imagined," she murmured softly. Hayden studied her profile before suddenly speaking. "There's an astronomy exhibition tonight. Want to go?" "Astronomy exhibition?" "Yeah." A faint smile touched his lips. "You once said you loved stargazing most when you were little." Cynthia paused. She had indeed said that, long ago, on a drunken night. She hadn't expected him to remember. Under the starry dome of the planetarium, Cynthia looked up at the simulated Milky Way slowly rotating. Hayden stood behind her, his arms loosely encircling her shoulders to prevent her from being bumped by the crowded visitors. "That's Altair from the Aquila constellation," he explained softly near her ear. In Chinese legend, it can only meet Vega once a year. Cynthia chuckled. Isn't that a tragedy though? But at least they get to reunite every year. Hayden murmured softly. Isn't that right? Cynthia turned her head to look at him and suddenly noticed how exceptionally long his eyelashes appeared under the blue light, as if dusted with starlight. The distance between them unknowingly narrowed, drawing closer. Cynthia! A hoarse roar came from behind. Cynthia turned around and saw Gilbert standing at the foot of the steps, his face deathly pale, his eyes bloodshot. He stared fixedly at Hayden's hand around her shoulder, his chest heaving violently. Who is he? The corridor lights in the planetarium were cold and white. Cynthia leaned against the wall, casually adjusting her cuffs. Mr. Gilbert, need I remind you? Your current behavior constitutes stalking and harassment. Gilbert's fists clenched audibly. I asked you who he is. Hayden. She smiled slightly. My partner, boyfriend, or future husband. Define it however you like. Husband. These two words stabbed into Gilbert's heart like a knife. He suddenly grabbed her wrist. We're not divorced yet. Cynthia looked down at his hand and suddenly laughed. Divorce. Gilbert, don't forget. Our marriage certificate was fake. She slowly withdrew her hand and pulled up a document on her phone, showing it to him. Certificate of invalid marriage registration. Do I need to remind you? She leaned close to his ear, her voice as soft as a serpent's hiss. Your lawful wife is currently in prison. Gilbert staggered back a step, as if all strength had been drained from him. Hayden stepped out from the shadows, one hand in his pocket, the other naturally wrapping around Cynthia's waist. Mr. Gilbert, he said calmly, if you keep harassing my girlfriend, I'll consider filing a restraining order. Gilbert stared at the hand resting on Cynthia's waist, suddenly remembering many years ago. Back then, he had done the same, under the school's cherry blossom tree, declaring his sovereignty before everyone. Cynthia is mine. No one else can touch her. Now the roles were reversed, and he was the one being warned, finally tasting what it meant to be heartbroken. On the way back in the car, Cynthia gazed at the rapidly receding street scenes outside the window and suddenly spoke up. Was I too cruel just now? Hayden held the steering wheel with one hand and covered the back of her hand with the other. Compared to what he did to you, this doesn't even count as interest. Cynthia looked down at their overlapping hands and suddenly realized, at some point, revenge was no longer the only reason keeping her alive. The sunroof slowly opened, revealing a sky full of twinkling stars. Hayden's voice mingled with the night breeze. Look, Vega. Cynthia tilted her head back, feeling for the first time that the starry sky could also not make one feel lonely. Not far behind them, Gilbert stood in the shadows, staring intently at Cynthia and Hayden's location. Cynthia, you're angry with me, aren't you? You must still care about me too. That's why you found someone like this, trying to make me bow my head. Right. His eyes darkened, as if he had made some kind of resolution. Torrential rain poured down. Homer Group's concrete plaza gleamed under the relentless downpour. Gilbert knelt in the curtain of rain, his suit long soaked through, his dark hair disheveled and plastered to his forehead. His knees sank deep into the puddled water, yet he stubbornly lifted his head, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the lit window on the top floor. He knew Cynthia was there. Cynthia. His voice was hoarse, nearly drowned out by the thunder. Please, see me one more time. The revolving door of the building slowly opened, and several security guards stepped out holding black umbrellas. The captain at the front side. Mr. Gilbert, President Nan has said that if you continue like this, we'll have no choice but to take forceful measures. Gilbert twitched the corner of his mouth as rainwater dripped from his jawline. Then let her come and drive me away herself. The security guards exchanged glances before reluctantly picking up their walkie-talkie to request instructions. A response seemed to come through the walkie-talkie, leaving the guards hesitant. After exchanging looks, they carried out a bucket. The next second, a bucket of ice-cold water mixed with ice cubes came pouring down from above, drenching Gilbert thoroughly. A bone-chilling cold instantly pierced through his marrow. His lips drained of color in an instant, and his entire body trembled uncontrollably. At the window on the top floor, Cynthia watched the scene coldly, lightly tapping her Bluetooth earpiece. Gilbert, did you really think a sympathy ploy would work on me? Her voice came through the security guard's walkie-talkie, clear and cruel. When you broke my bones back then, I didn't get the chance to beg you on my knees. The next morning, Gilbert woke up in the hotel suite to find all his credit cards frozen. His phone vibrated incessantly. The screen flooded with missed calls from his bank manager. He called back, only to be met with an unusually grave tone. Mr. Gilbert, your personal account has been frozen by the cross-border settlement system, including the overseas trust fund. Gilbert clutched the phone until his knuckles turned white. Cynthia was pushing him to the brink. Without Homer, his assets frozen. He couldn't even afford to pay for a hotel room now. He suddenly let out a low laugh. The sound hoarse like sandpaper rubbing. Cynthia, you really left me no way out. And Cynthia's revenge went far beyond that. At the company's all-staff meeting, Cynthia sat at the head of the table, lightly tapping her fingers on the desktop. There's a special segment today. She spoke slowly, smiling as she looked at the audience. Let's welcome Mr. Gilbert to read aloud a business model essay. Gilbert stood in the corner, his face deathly pale. In his hand, he clutched a stack of yellowed papers. Those were the love letters he had written to Cynthia at 18, each page soaked with the most sincere vows of his youth. Read it, Cynthia urged softly. Let everyone learn from Mr. Gilbert's writing. The entire venue was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Gilbert's fingertips trembled slightly, yet he still turned to the first page. Cynthia, seeing you in that white dress today made my heart race so fast I thought I might die. His voice was hoarse, and by the time he reached the third page, his Adam's apple bobbed violently. When I turn 22, let's get married. Okay, I'll love you for a lifetime. Only you. His voice was hoarse beyond recognition. Yet he read every word clearly, finishing all 20 pages. As he read the final line, the room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, with several female employees quietly tearing up. Cynthia remained smiling throughout, even applauding when it ended. What a brilliant performance, she commented. Pity it's all lies. Gilbert jerked his head up, something in his eyes shattering completely. This incident sparked massive discussions within the company. Hayden burst through the door and slammed a stack of documents onto the desk. The papers spread out, revealing the medical record on top. Gilbert, severe depression, accompanied by symptoms of gastric bleeding. Take a look at this. Hayden's voice was as cold as ice. If this continues, he'll die. Cynthia glanced down, her fingers unconsciously curling slightly before quickly regaining composure. She took a sip of coffee, her tone indifferent. So, Hayden stared at her, suddenly smiling, though the warmth didn't reach his eyes. So, Cynthia, when did you become like this? He took a step closer, his slender fingers tapping on the medical records with a dull thud. Was stripping him of everything not enough. Forcing him to report to you like a dog every day wasn't enough. Now you won't be satisfied until you see him in the ICU. Cynthia's eyelashes fluttered slightly, the coffee cup growing warm in her palms. I didn't force him. She lifted her gaze, her eyes icy cold. He deserved this, did he? Hayden suddenly leaned in, bracing his hands on the arms of her chair, trapping her in the confined space. Then why can't you look at me? Cynthia's breath caught. Hayden's voice lowered, carrying an indescribable tone. Cynthia, have you never really let go of him? The office fell into dead silence. Raindrops tapped against the window outside, like some kind of countdown. Cynthia set down her coffee cup, its base meeting the table with a soft clink. I didn't, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Yet those 3 words seemed wrung out with all her strength. Hayden didn't move, maintaining that oppressive stance, his gaze scraping across her face like a blade. Then why won't you admit you went too far? Cynthia suddenly stood up, nearly nose to nose with him. Hayden, you know what I've been through. You know I know. Hayden cut her off, his voice unexpectedly softening. But what's the difference between you now and Gilbert back then? The words struck like a slap, brutally landing on Cynthia's face. She staggered back a step, her chest heaving violently. When had she become like this? For revenge. She could coldly watch Gilbert wither day by day, could precisely calculate every ounce of his suffering, even relish his breakdown. Isn't this exactly what Gilbert did to her back then? Her voice choked up. Hayden sighed and reached out to touch her cheek. Hate burns for too long. It will turn even yourself to ashes. Cynthia closed her eyes, a tear silently sliding down. Bang! The office door was suddenly pushed open as the secretary rushed in frantically. President Lin, Homer's former faction has joined forces with 3 private equity funds to maliciously acquire our company's circulating stocks. Cynthia snapped awake instantly. When did this happen? Just half an hour ago. They've already secured 12% of the shares and are still buying aggressively. The secretary handed over the tablet. This is the person leading the charge. On the screen, Homer, the former financial director, was being interviewed, his smile chilling. NY's acquisition tactics have always been controversial. We're merely setting things right, taking back what's ours. Cynthia clenched her fists, her nails digging deep into her palms. Henry, that financial director she had once turned to her side. Call an immediate meeting to formulate countermeasures, Cynthia ordered coldly, and investigate the source of their funds. No need. Hayden suddenly interrupted her. Henry was probably pretending to be bought by you from the very beginning. Cynthia turned sharply. What do you mean? Hayden nodded with a complicated expression. You thought he was Homer's man, but most likely, he belongs to no one. He's acting for his own interests. Cynthia's mind raced. If that were the case, then this matter was far simpler than she had imagined. She suddenly grabbed her coat. Prepare the car. We're going to Homer. Hayden frowned. What are you going there for? Cynthia didn't look back. To find Gilbert. Cynthia pushed open the door to find Gilbert standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. His silhouette as gaunt as a shadow. At the sound, he turned slowly, a flicker of surprise flashing in his eyes before fading into lifelessness. Rare visitor, he rasped. Has President Lin come to inspect the work in person? Cynthia walked straight up to him and shoved the tablet forward. Explain. Gilbert glanced at the screen, his brow slightly furrowed. I wasn't aware of this. Henry is your man. He used to be. Gilbert looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers directly. Just as I once belonged to you. Cynthia's breath caught. After a brief standoff, she suddenly took a deep breath. I need you to help me resolve this. Gilbert froze. Outside the window, the rain grew heavier, its trails meandering down the glass like tears. Why? He asked softly. Cynthia paused briefly before offering an answer that even surprised herself. Because only you understand Homer's old faction's way of operation. This isn't the whole truth. Homer's former mid to high-level employees, half of them are still under her command. But she would never admit that the moment she saw his medical records. Something inside her cracked. Gilbert gazed at her for a long time before suddenly smiling. A weary yet relieved smile. All right. He turned and took a document from the drawer, handing it to her. This is the network and leverage I've compiled on Homer's old faction. Enough for you to counter them. Cynthia opened the file, her pupils contracting slightly. The document was remarkably detailed, clearly not prepared recently. Did you anticipate this day long ago? Gilbert didn't answer, merely walking to the coat rack to retrieve his suit jacket. Let's go. While I still remember how to be Mr. Gilbert. His back was ramrod straight, as if he had momentarily regained some of the sharpness from his prime. This might be the last thing he could do for her. Homer Group's conference room. Cynthia pushed the final document to the end of the long table. Your severance packages have been deposited, she said calmly, scanning the faces of the senior members present, each with a different expression. From today onward, Homer has no further ties with any of you. The financial director spoke with a trembling voice. President Nan, we've been with the family for 30 years. That's why you can leave with double compensation and your dignity intact. Cynthia tapped the table lightly with her fingertips. Instead of ending up like Blanche, counting the stitches on your face in prison. The meeting room fell into dead silence. In the corner, Gilbert kept his head low, his wrinkled suit still carrying the dampness of the rainy night. He remained silent throughout, like an empty shell drained of its soul. After the crowd dispersed, Gilbert remained seated in his spot, unmoving. Anything else? Cynthia closed the folder. He suddenly reached out to press down on the documents, his knuckles turning white. Is there really no chance left for us? Cynthia's gaze fell on his hand. There was a fresh wound there, cut when he smashed the mirror the night before. She remembered many years ago, when the young Gilbert climbed over the wall to bring her strawberries. His palm cut by the barbed wire, yet smiling as he said, "It doesn't hurt." Do you know what I was thinking in that sack that day? She whispered. I was thinking, if you just glanced back at me, even for a moment. Gilbert's pupils contracted violently. But you didn't. Cynthia withdrew the document. So my answer is no. Not a single shred. Hayden's words suddenly echoed in his ears. He was right. The best ending to revenge is complete forgetting. She turned and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window. Sunlight pierced the clouds, gilding her silhouette in pale gold. A few days later, Cynthia suddenly received a video from an unknown number. In the footage, Gilbert was kneeling on steep stone steps, his forehead pressed against the bluestone, bowing every 3 steps. Dark red bloodstains snaked along the steps, his knees already torn and mangled. This was the temple where she had once prayed for Buddhist beads for him. The background audio was the voice of an assistant, whispering a report. Mr. Gilbert has been kneeling for 3 days. The abbot says he is praying for. Delete it. Cynthia turned off the video. No need to report his affairs anymore. She walked to the safe, took out a share transfer agreement, signed it, then paused before pulling out a sticky note. The pen hovered for a long time before finally writing just 3 words. We're even. Gilbert was lying in the temple's meditation room when he received the documents, burning with fever, his mind in a daze. The abbot sighed as he handed him hot tea. Benefactor. Obsession harms both others and oneself. With trembling hands, he opened the documents. The stock transfer agreement slipped out, and the note was lifted by the wind seeping through the window crack, fluttering lightly to rest over his heart. In his delirium, he remembered that year when he was 20. Cynthia waiting for him in the snow, her nose red from the cold but smiling as she said, Gilbert, I've waited for you. And now, she finally stopped waiting. Outside the window, the first snow of winter quietly fell. Hayden's car stopped in front of a pure white building on the outskirts of the city. I originally wanted to wait until it was completed to show you. He opened the car door for her, his fingertips lightly brushing her palm. But someone's been such a workaholic lately that I couldn't even get an appointment. Cynthia raised an eyebrow. Dr. Hayden, is that a complaint? It's an accusation. He lowered his head to nibble on the tip of her ear. You've been neglecting me for 3 days and 7 hours. The interior of the building was brightly lit, and a crystal plaque at the end of the corridor was covered with red silk. Hayden suddenly covered her eyes from behind. Count down 3 seconds. In the darkness, she heard the sound of fabric slipping away. Look now. The red silk fell to the ground, and the inscription on the plaque, Cynthia Trauma Medical Research Center, gleamed under the spotlight. All profits will go towards post-traumatic stress disorder research. Hayden's breath brushed past her ear, including those old scars on your knees. Cynthia gazed at the plaque, her throat suddenly tightening. The scar left from kneeling before the prayer beads. He still remembered it after all these years, whether by coincidence or not. The floor-to-ceiling windows in the research center lounge directly face Homer's old building. Cynthia was reviewing data with her head down when she suddenly noticed shifting light patterns on the ceiling. As she looked up, a line of fluorescent blue text flickered across the white wall. Cynthia, the kite is stuck in the tree. She froze all over. This was the secret language invented by Gilbert at the age of 16. That day, he broke his arm retrieving her kite, yet smiled and said, Cynthia, don't cry. It doesn't hurt. On the rooftop of the opposite building, a slender figure leaned against the railing, a laser pointer still swaying in their hand. Even from 100 meters away, she could recognize it was Gilbert, wearing the same school uniform jacket from their first encounter. Like a stubborn ghost, the light spot continued to wander, and new handwriting emerged. This time, I'll catch you. Cynthia stared quietly for 3 seconds, then suddenly stood up and tightly closed the curtains. As darkness enveloped the room, she dialed Hayden's number. Come to the lounge now. She heard her own voice eerily calm. And bring the ring you hid in the second drawer of the dressing room. A sharp clatter of falling equipment came through the phone. When did you find out? Hayden's breathing noticeably faltered. Cynthia traced a sliver of light leaking through the curtain gap, the corner of her lips curling. Last time you secretly measured my ring size, you got chalk dust all over my hand. The laser from the opposite building was still trying to pierce through the curtains, casting faint spots of light on the floor. She stepped on the glimmer with her foot, hearing the frantic footsteps outside the door drawing nearer. Hayden. She suddenly called his full name. I need you to come in right now and propose. The door was flung open, and there he stood, clutching a velvet ring box, panting heavily, his eyes sparkling. The laser flickered one last reluctant flash at their feet before extinguishing completely. Cynthia's wedding dress had no intricate lace, just simple satin that shimmered with a pearl-like luster under the moonlight. Hayden wore a white shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his tie already loosened. Holding her hand, They exchanged rings on the stargazing platform atop the Alps. Below stood only a dozen close friends. The clinking of champagne glasses mingling with the mountain breeze, crisp as the sound of shattering stars. I thought you'd want a grander wedding. Hayden lowered his head to kiss her fingertips. Cynthia gazed at the Milky Way. Only those who have been the center of attention know how precious quietness is. The attendant brought over a mountain of gifts, among which an ebony box stood out conspicuously. Cynthia opened the box lid, and in that instant, Hayden distinctly felt her fingers tremble. The string of prayer beads Gilbert once gave to Blanche now lies quietly on the velvet lining, each sandalwood bead glowing with a warm luster, clearly having been caressed for a long time. The attached card reads, "This time, it's my turn to beg for your safety." Hayden took the box and tossed it to the assistant. "Donate it to the temple." Cynthia smiled instead, casually draping the prayer beads over the bouquet. It makes for a good cautionary tale. In the austere ward of the psychiatric hospital, the television was broadcasting wedding news. Blanche's emaciated fingers clawed at the screen, her nails splitting and bleeding without her even noticing. "I'm the real Mrs." she shrieked, smashing a glass. "Look, I'm prettier than her, right?" The prison guard watched coldly until she collapsed exhausted in a pool of blood, then dragged her back to the bed like a dead dog. "Prisoner 0487 has had another episode," the nurse wrote in the logbook. "Today's self-harm count, 7 times." As soon as the words were spoken, Blanche screamed and knocked over the mirror in front of her. "What is this? Who sent this? Who sent this?" Her face, once bearing a 70% resemblance to Cynthia's, now was covered with hideous scars, her right eye unable to fully close. The prison guard looked at her indifferently. "Anonymous donation. By regulation, you must accept it." Blanche clawed frantically at her own face until it was dripping with blood. She recognized this mirror. The frame was engraved with a small line of text. "Look at yourself now. Who do you still resemble?" Blanche frantically smashed the mirror against the wall, shards flying everywhere. Outside the window, a crow swept past the iron bars, letting out a piercing cry, like a merciless taunt. In a makeshift hospital in the African desert, Gilbert was kneeling on the ground, bandaging a child's wound. The scorching sun had peeled the skin on the back of his neck, and the expensive suit had long been replaced by a crumpled linen shirt. When the little boy timidly handed him a grubby piece of candy, he suddenly remembered 18-year-old Cynthia. She always used to slip strawberry-flavored hard candies into his textbooks. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A news alert. New York goes public today. Estimated market value exceeds $100 billion. The moment the lock screen lit up, the nurse gasped in surprise. This usually taciturn doctor had a teenage girl in school uniform as his phone wallpaper. The photo showed the girl standing under a cherry blossom tree, turning back with a smile. As the bell tolled, Hayden lit fireworks on a New York rooftop. A listing gift. He wrapped his arms around Cynthia from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. How does this compare to Gilbert's extravagance of renting out an amusement park back then? She turned and kissed Hayden. "Not even close." You're 10 times more handsome than him." Fireworks exploded above their heads, illuminating the never-extinguished lights of desire on Wall Street. The end.